want to ask the same question of everyone because it was a question that Jeff, where you asked of me when I was standing here. And it was, if you had unlimited funding, what would you prioritize for interstellar travel and why? You can choose anything.
You start with me.
I'm gonna start with you.
It's simple. We need to do the space elevator. I mean, that way we could start fast and have an easy ride.
Is there a particular part of the space elevator that you'd prioritize getting?
Well, it's like you want to come back. I want to make sure it works. So the whole thing.
Okay. No, wait. Yeah.
Do I get to say stuff?
You're a panelist.
Oh, I'm a panelist now. Well, I've been upgraded. Unlimited funding. I would pump it all into circular economy and ecosystem research because without that, we ain't going nowhere.
I'd put all the money into crew comfort and life cycle management in a very sustainable way.
It's a little similar to that because the human factors are where we need to invest the most, especially in extended space travel.
Bill?
If we're restricting this to interstellar related things, yes?
For interstellar related travel,
okay,
yes.
yeah, just bigger flashlight.
What?
Bigger flashlight.
Bigger flashlight, okay. And Dr. Olabisi, what would you prioritize with funding?
Energy.
Energy?
Yeah. So we could go faster and have some magnetic shielding.
Okay. And sort of staying with that, I'm going to stay with you, Ronke. So you described, which were for some of us sort of harrowing ideas about how difficult the radiation is going to be. I want to ask two questions. Well, first of all, I want to just thank you again for recognizing and helping the group to recognize how important physiology is in all of this. Okay. And how we have to look at different kinds of crew selection. But that's okay. Nobody's laughing. I'm not even getting the smiles out of the group. Okay. But anyway, but what I want to ask you is, could you describe two things, whether or not the biological or the medical components you said we need to start to look for in radiation, to help look with cosmic radiation, what would that look like? And also, would the use of a projected magnetic field on the craft be something that would surround the craft? Would that be something that would be helpful or useful?
Okay, I had to unmute myself. So I'm going to answer your last question first. So there are very powerful magnetic fields that only are able to deflect these particles slightly. So the jury is out on that one. People don't it's going to do that much. But, if I had unlimited funds, I would try to see. And the first question, could you repeat it? I wasn't sure that I caught it.
One of the things you mentioned that would be helpful because the shielding, just the physical shielding of mass would not help, that we really need to look at biological or therapeutic or medicine or drugs. What would be some of those kinds of therapeutics that we could look at?
So some of the DNA repair mechanisms, they understand very well. And they understand what the DNA is doing to do that. And so I think things that could help those repair mechanisms might be useful. I'm not aware of anything that has been invented yet that works. The things that work are the things for the indirect damage. So reactive oxygen species, everybody has heard of antioxidants. And so those are helpful in some ways.
Okay. Thank you. So Peter, you said to space elevator, is this real? Is it, tell us, is the engineering real?
Yes.
Be more specific.
Okay, the concept's been around for a long time, and a lot of people have developed it in over the years and everything else, and I can list a whole bunch of inventors. But the bottom line is about 5 years ago, we had the material surface, which is superlaminate graphene. And since then, they've really gotten that to the point where it's really developed. And there's nothing in the space elevator I couldn't build today except for the tether. And a friend of mine who's working in single crystal graphene at the University of Manchester has offered to give me a single molecule, 1 atom thick, 1 meter wide, 100,000 kilometers long. And the concept, I mean, it's kind of like jokingly, but the concept is that's what they're looking for, a production line of the material coming out of the furnace that you then put on a reel and you reel it up. And since it's so light, we could literally take 100,000 kilometer length of that material and take it up in a single rocket, put it up at geosynchronous, deploy it up and down. And it would probably be 10,000 layers thick. So these are all thoughts in the process being discussed at the University of Manchester right now. And so we are on the route. And he said he could probably get me the length and strength that I need by 2032. Now, okay, let's assume that it's a little longer than that. Okay, who cares? The real kicker is they're on the path to do that. And once you get the tether, everything else is trivial. I mean, there's nothing that's not easy to do. The Earthport's a stupid oil platform. The other end is just a bunch of mass that was in the satellite that you took the satellite, the tether up in. You don't have anything at GEO because you just let go there and you're in orbit where you want to be. So everything's simple, and the tether climber, almost anybody can do. It's a train track with a box. I mean, the answer is I'm simplifying it for the audience, but there are many, many serious questions that we have to address, no doubt about it. But I believe they're all doable. It turns out I've done 2 mega projects in my career, and every mega project has a schedule along here and then has a box. The last one I did, Iridium, had 3 boxes, and it was MR. And when our CEO of Motorola saw the schedule and saw MR, he said, "What the heck is MR? I don't understand that one." And we all chuckled and said, "Miracle required." And he said, "What do you mean? I mean, are we supposed to cancel the program? I mean, you got to have a miracle to do 3 of them to make it work?" And we said, "Well, those are euphemisms for really tough problems we really haven't solved yet." And he said, "Well, what's that one right there?" And we said, "Well, it's the speed of the chips. We got to have really fast chips in our, cell tower in orbit." And he said, "What type of speed?" And we told him, and we're all space people, so we don't know that. We don't know the game of cellular towers. And he started laughing. And he just crossed that one out, "Man, the miracle's occurred already." And we said, "What do you mean?" He says, "Down in our labs down in Florida, we're going that fast right now. By the time you need it in 4 years, we'll be going another order of magnitude faster than that." And the point is that there are MR boxes in everything you do if you're doing mega projects. And we've got a few of those, but we'll solve it. I mean, it just takes time. And we'll beat that. So I think the answer is space elevators are real. With MRs.
Sonia, I have a question for you. Can you take your research and relate these space applications to problems on Earth? What happens on Earth with what you're doing?
So the example that I gave was in electrification. So a lot of, particularly the battery work for solid-state batteries, are used for electrification, not only for ground vehicles, but for electric vehicles as well. And in particular, advances in materials are really making the difference. It's happening at a vast speed, and we're able to sort of get the unobtainium, as someone said, now define the materials that we need for a certain application and go to the material scientists, and they're able to characterize those. And we want to get from powders to plates so that you can manufacture materials for these specific applications in a rapid way. So I think just as Apollo, the mission terrestrial applications were beneficial from that. The interstellar missions also have definite benefits for us along the way.
Anything we're going to see in the near future that you'd want to tell us about?
Yes, you'll be able to charge your electric car in about the time that you can gas it up in 10 minutes without excessive heat and worrying about thermal runaway and things like that.
Works for me. That's nice.
So Phil, it should be obvious, but I want to make sure that we're clear. Define the difference between how you use the term directed energy and projected power.
Yeah, so in the lingo in the industry, oftentimes the term directed energy refers to weapon systems. Sometimes people who are not interested in reaching out and blowing up something or punching a hole through it use the term beam power. For me, they're the same. I don't have a hang up either way. So I use the term directed energy because you're directing, power, which then over time becomes energy. The things which are kind of swept under the rug because we don't have time to do all the details in any of our talks here are really that these are highly complex problems which require really deep attention to the details. In the case of the stuff which I spoke about, of what we're doing in the lab, what works, what we're struggling with, the problem really is a mathematical problem in phase convergence and how rapidly you converge. The thing that I had on the slide but didn't dwell upon is that from our point of view, the proper place for this is not on Earth, period. It's really in space. On the moon is a good place backside to avoid some political problems. But having on Earth has highly complicated problems due to the Earth's atmosphere. So I'd rather get rid of that problem. That also simplifies a lot of the complexity in the system as well. So there is no, in my mind, to answer your question directly, there is no difference between DE, the directed energy, power projection, beam power. They're all the same. In some people's minds, they don't like that, but I use them synonymously.
And continuing on with sort of definitions. So we have the terms transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary. Tony, when you think through some of the issues or some of the new disciplines that come across, do you see them more as interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary, and could you define one and describe?
Well, they're very similar, as you said, but usually in multidisciplinary, the different disciplinaries collect together and work on a certain project. And interdisciplinary, usually you're working with several disciplines. I'm not sure if that was even clear enough.
At one point in time, I spent a lot of time looking at transdisciplinary, sort of thinking that in environmental sciences, everything is transdisciplinary. As we look at sustainability, nothing starts or ends in one single place. That the entire time you look at it, you have to be thinking across multiple fields and how they will impact each other. Are we seeing that in space exploration or?
Well, exactly. I mean, what you said is exactly what we were looking at. Everything, as we just saw, or I tried to explain, is changeable, is movable, is variable, and is affected by all the other changes. And when we look at any item, like we were talking about shielding, for example, and we have to check all the material existing, and we have also checked the possibility of electromagnetic field, for example. And then we have to look also at the biology of our human body. So everything here is multidisciplinary. And the more complicated the trip is, the farther we go, the higher level of transdisciplinary we'll have to work with, the more disciplinaries we have to include. And we cannot just have knowledge of them. They have all to be included and working together to reach a solution.
And I'm going to jump up to Ronke. Your discussion we discussed the radiation. I also know you worked on papers. We worked on stuff around space biomaterials. And there was idea that we needed to look at a new term and in fact introduce the term space biomaterials because it wasn't there. Could you describe a little bit about the survey that was done around and the review of using biomaterials in space exploration and how it becomes transdisciplinary and how we end up thinking through that there needs to be a new field and the difference between biomaterials on Earth and why there's these disconnects in new languages?
Okay, so I think everybody sees those terms differently of them. For me, I think we have a lot of great examples in the biomedical field, biomedical engineering and bioengineering, because it's really a hodgepodge of a lot of different disciplines. And one of the first successful artificial heart devices came because, the traditional people looking at them weren't getting anything done. And so they went to NASA and got a person who was an expert in fluid dynamics and demonstrated that you did not need pulsatile flow. And the doctors working on it were accustomed to pulsatile flow and thought that it was needed. And the NASA fluid dynamicists demonstrated that you could do it without it. And so they sought a transdisciplinary answer and then created a multidisciplinary team to solve that problem. And as a result, we have things like the left ventricular assist device. But right now, most of the biomaterials, and biomaterials are specifically on Earth defined as materials that have an interaction with part of your body, a specific type of interaction. So glasses would not be a biomaterial because they don't really interact, but contact lenses would. And anybody who's ever seen images of corneal melt know that if you have the wrong type of material, you can really mess up your eyeballs. And so further in, you have cataract replacements or any kinds of devices that go inside the body. Now, if we're talking about for space, we need things that will, because space affects every single biological system. And so something that serves as a biomaterial on Earth serves a completely different physiological state than something that would be a biomaterial in space. So like for instance, the ISS is colonized with lots of bacteria, and where you might want to, when surgeons do a surgery on Earth, they sterilize every single piece of equipment in an autoclave, which might not be possible in space. So if you want the biomaterial of surgical equipment, maybe you have a new biomaterial where all you got to do is shake it in the air and all the bacteria fly off of it, which you would not do on Earth. And so we were looking at the unique challenges that come in dealing with the human body in space and the materials that would help promote health that would have to interact with the body, and how these would have to be different because the body is different.
All right, so I would like to ask everybody, in one of the questions we had on the screen, there was a question of what research would be happening on a crewed flight, interstellar flight, and what kind of meaningful activities could the crew be doing if they're not in hibernation? Obviously, meaningful is a rather wide term, but what would you want them to be engaged in? And we started with Pete earlier, so Phil, let's go to you first. What would you see a research team on an interstellar craft engaged in?
So I hate to say this, but I will say it. What I'd like to see them do in flight is what I'd like to see them do on Earth, which is re-engineer humans to be more compatible with an interstellar mission. Because if you look at us, we're, to quote you, May, we're a bag of slime. I think you
I
roughly
did not say slime,
Okay.
squishy bag of water.
Squishy bag of water. Sorry. Okay.
That sort of is
I'm sorry.
revealing about something. But anyway, keep going.
Okay. Okay. So, but, you know, if you look at us, we're not the optimal creatures for this kind of journey. And the thing you really want is, you know, something up here, not the rest of the stuff that goes with it. And so I would love to see a crew take on that challenge while they're in flight. And then at the end, they all turned into, you know, little miniature things. But I know that's not the answer you wanted, but it's my honest feeling.
Well, an human interstellar trip, first of all, is going to be a long time from now, and the science that we're practicing now is totally different. We don't know what type of science will exist at that time, what type of science people on an interstellar trip will be actually looking for. A lot of our classic science here on Earth is tied to Earth itself and its location in the Milky Way and everything else. So basically, there are going to be a lot of different type of science and education for people venturing away from Earth. And I don't know exactly what need to be learned there and studied, and what people would like to learn anymore if they're not coming back to Earth, which is the case of most of interstellar space travel, at least as we see it. So it might be something not related to Earth at all. It will be related to humans, but not be related to Earth. Even I would like to see how physics will be then. What type of physics we'll learn if we're going to a different place, how many things are applicable at the big scale, and still especially that's something we try to work on and resolve for a long time in astrophysics, the theory, you know, of everything. So that's the part I would like to see how it's going to be handled, because it might be applicable to everywhere in the universe.
Sonia, what do you have?
I'd like to see experiments on some of the things that are going on now, materials that are better characterized and grown in space, but also then looking at using those for manufacturing processes. So I hate the term 3D printing, but I'll use it here. But I'd like to see kind of advances in that area with materials that are grown and characterized in space, and then looking at how that information can be transferred back to Earth so that we can study that further.
Ronke, let's go up to you.
I mean, I don't know how possible this is, but if we're on the interstellar trip, I'm assuming anything's possible. I'd like them to try to figure out how to harness wormholes so everybody can go. And it's not a really long trip. We can see cool stuff. That's what I would want.
So is failure is not an option in that case, is it? Oh, she disappeared into a wormhole, I think. All right, May, what do you have?
Me?
Yes. You put me on the spot, now I put you on the spot. That's fair.
So I'm surprised nobody said dark matter or dark energy, or whether or not we have a vantage point if we're past it. Is there something that we can learn from the interstellar journey that would be mine
Okay.
after I turn into a tardigrade?
Right. Okay. I've got a simple thing. I'm an engineer, so I would like the chief engineer of the whole space system to be in charge of the maintenance researchers. And I use a term in a real sense. If we get a bunch of people together, put them in a box and send them that way, there's no reason why we can't improve our situation as we go. So I think the research on day-to-day support, what are the needs of the people and how are we not satisfying them? How do we research it? So the chief engineer of the vessel ought to be a research guy or lady who's going out saying, what do we really need? And then we ought to fix it. Well, part of the problem there is we need some extra planks and some extra water and some extra screws and everything outside the vehicle on there. So we'd have to trade mass going away with innovative, creative tools to improve your flight.
And so I'm actually going to take the liberty and answer my own question too, because I would like to point to one thing too, that I would like the crew to be engaging in art and literature, and I would love to see a theater company on an interstellar flight. I would love to see, especially in microgravity, I would love to see theater in microgravity.
I think we need to write science fiction too.
Oh, absolutely, yes. And we need to see what kind of literature and art and music and dance develops on board. Absolutely.
So I want us to go out to the audience and to the online folks. But first, I want to just give you a little bit more about 100 Year Starship, and I want you to just show some slides. And but particularly, what I want to do is to just tell you about what we're doing, and because do I have to do something up here? Do I have to have a clicker or something? No, yes, no, maybe so. But the reason why I want to do this is to talk, and can I? But the reason why I want to do that is just to talk about some of the things, because we're talking about different kinds of science and different kinds of things. And one of the things that we did and with Nexus Nairobi, these will be all pictures of that. We spoke with Ariel Waldman, who was in Antarctica at the time. So we had this link going. So it was really kind of one of these cool things where we really know that we can make these connections, we create these worlds and open these doors. And she was talking about robust life forms, Phil, that can hang out in very desiccated kinds of places that are very harsh. Those things we get to learn that help us really understand exobiology. Pete was there along with a number of other folks, and we had discussions about not only about Breakthrough Starship, but our Breakthrough Discuss, Breakthrough Listen, but really, what do we look through in rounds around science? Hakeem Olasheyi was there, who does a lot of work around science communications, but was really sort of to just change a different point of view. What we said with 100 Year Starship, it was really from cosmologists to cosmetologists, really opening up the point of view with Nexus Nairobi. Not the deep dive at the crucibles that we do. We're going to come and talk maybe about more esoterica. Also looking at women, particularly women from developing worlds and being able to be involved with space exploration. One of the people that you see there is Peggy Brookings, who's the CEO of the National Board of Professional Teaching Standards, who was really looking at education and other issues, as well as someone with the Traveling Telescope, who founded the Traveling Telescope. A microbiologist from Puerto Rico who did stuff with actually looking at you make microscopes to look at organisms. You put them into citizen science programs, and an aerospace engineer from India who also talked about, these are the workshop programs, but the aerospace engineer from India also talked about indigenous knowledge. So we had a whole panel on indigenous knowledge and how that can be impact in space exploration. And then the other thing we wanted to do, Nichelle Nichols, we were really privileged to have Nichelle Nichols as one of our advisors for 100 Year Starship when we first started. And she was with us at every symposium. She did things where she would bring her energy and her grace to lots of our projects. And we were just fortunate to have it, and we wanted to make sure that we acknowledged her. And so many of us did grow up and are even looked back with what Star Trek did before Star Wars. And but really sort of the whole difference, but being able to move forward and how important stories and opening the world is for everyone. And just leaving up, our Nexus Nairobi will be March 3rd through the 9th in Nairobi. And so look for it. And now I'd like to open it up. And James, do you have mics and questions?
All right. Hello. So I'm hearing all this talk about one-way interstellar vehicles and doing all this amazing science on it. And I think at least we could discover on those vehicles that, gravity doesn't exist or some super fundamental shift in how we know about, or what we know about the universe, but that won't matter unless we know how to get that information back to the Earth, right? And at least the way I see things right now, there would need to be a miracle made in our communications equipment for us to actually be able to do that. So what do you propose the solution to that is, at least right now?
So great question. I don't think no miracles required here unless you're demanding something which is what I'd say exotica. So if you want more than petahertz, or petabits per second coming back, then I think that's hard. It's not impossible, but it's hard. The example I gave you at a gigabit per second was a simple 10-meter aperture on board, that's a transmitter, and a 10-meter receiver on the ground. Neither of those is exotica at all. And I put 10 megawatts as a transmit power. You're going to have a ship that's 1,000 tons, 10 megawatts. It's not that big a deal. So that's a gigabit per second. And I used 1 bit per photon. You could do better than that. So, you could up that to 10 gigabits per second. So I'm not sure what range of data you want back, but that's a pretty high bandwidth already with pretty small apertures and power levels.
What if the signal-to-noise ratio kind of becomes awful over time?
Well, okay, so what I did was look at that data rate is the data rate at the target. So that's sort of the worst case in this scenario, which was roughly 4.5 light years away. It's much higher in between. So that was at the target. Okay, so if you want to go out a megaparsec, which in theory you could do if you went at 99.9999% the speed of light over some period of time, then it clearly becomes a much more challenging problem. But I would say in the nearby stars, of which there are roughly 150 stellar systems within 20 light years of the Earth, then communication back to the Earth is not impossible. In this scenario, it's very, very hard in the scenario that we're dealing with Starshot, where you have this little, tiny thing that you're trying to get data back from. Then it's a really difficult problem. But in this large case scenario that 100-year Starship is interested in, where these are big spacecraft, then you have the ability to have large apertures and high powers.
Hi. One of the things I was looking at is, and with all the great discussions that we had, we're really talking about infrastructure. I mean, we can dispassionately call it interstellar travel, we can call it space elevators. This is simply part of infrastructure for humans. So it's always good to compare infrastructure. I mean, when roads started for automobiles, they couldn't afford to put concrete or asphalt roads between towns. They would pave a mile. They would call it the Miracle Mile. And it's like you could drive your car on the Miracle Mile and see what it would be like not to break your axle in a rut. So, and eventually people agreed, and they said, if you agree, raise taxes and pave your roads. We'll build the equipment, we'll send the concrete, we'll do whatever, but that's what's needed. So again, just kind of looking at some of the infrastructure in some terms. I mean, if we talked about the elevator and we said like the geosynchronous transfer orbit, if that was a terminus, that's 3,700 kilometers. Well, there's actually 260,000 kilometers of railroad track in the United States. So not a ridiculous number, not at all. And also, to build a mile of railroad track is $2 million a mile. So that begins to put an idea of what that is. Also for building a highway, that's $20 million a mile. So that, and think about how many highways you've driven on. And then finally, NASA for SLS on the launch tower, not the crawler transporter, not anything else. They spent $1 billion on just the launch tower over a decade. So think about that in terms of infrastructure. And again, like when you talk about the budgets and the size and the scale of things, it's not unreasonable. Not unreasonable at all.
Does anyone want to respond to that, or perhaps Karen? It wasn't.
Well, okay, I'll respond in this way. I think what we're doing is that's exactly right. So we can look at this range of things. The reason why it's not just one piece, right? It's a range of things. Even in infrastructure that we were looking at, Tony talked about this cruise we did. It was called Virtual Human, and it was done with the Medical University of Graz and in Austria. And we were looking at how do we replace the health infrastructure here on Earth if you're going a long way out. Right now, everything that's predicated, that's being designed for Moon, for ISS, for even Mars, is based on the health infrastructure here on Earth, which is, being able to do the epidemiology, being able to do the drug discovery. All of those things are based on the infrastructure on Earth. When you get 10 years out, you can't do that anymore. The medicine starts to deteriorate. The microbes might have changed. So you really need to be able to do that health infrastructure. What would that look like? It's a different type of infrastructure, but I think you're absolutely correct.
I can add a very specific example to that. Also, the idea of heading out of the solar system, let's say we do it with technology that takes decades, right? Current technology, 40-year mission perhaps, 30-year mission. If you use the same practice as is currently done on the ISS in terms of laundry, which nobody does in space, dirty laundry is thrown out. And so you have the dorm room dream, as we call it. You put it in a bag and it burns up in the atmosphere. You try and do that for 40 years for a single human being at the rate that they change clothes on the ISS. You wind up with one shipping container full of clothing per person. So now do the math for the kind of crew that you need to have, and you suddenly have a large interstellar craft filled with shipping containers of textiles. So there's your infrastructure problem writ large, and this is why circular economies and recycling will matter on board.
Let me direct that a little bit towards Sonia, because a lot of your work is around thermal and energy. Is there an infrastructure piece that you would see in this?
There's definitely a need for an infrastructure piece. I mean, one of the things that we talked about was not repeating the mistakes that we're making here and exporting those elsewhere. So doing things sustainably, as Carl mentioned, to make sure that we're not polluting, that we're not ruining another world, as you say, as we've done here in so many aspects. If you take the extraction industry, for instance, there was, I think Tony was in your talk, you talked about the space economy and extracting minerals from asteroids, helium-3 from the moon, those kinds of things. But we need to learn from what we've done here on Earth to make sure we do that in a way that is not violating, or that we do that in a, say it in a positive, that we do that in a sustainable way.
Karen?
Okay. Yeah, so trying to relate the last 2 days of discuss, which one do you think will happen first, interstellar travel or finding evidence of intelligent life? And whichever comes first, how do you think that will affect the other, whether that's in terms of like technology or where we go, how we decide to go about next centuries when that happens? Yeah.
Ronke, would you like to take that one?
I heard a theory once, and I think I like it the most, that there's probably, because of the just sheer size of the universe, there's probably hundreds, if not thousands, if not millions of civilizations, but that they don't occur at the same time. And that over time, if you looked at a field of fireflies, you can't capture which one is flashing. They flash in and out, and very rarely do they overlap. So evidence of intelligent life in terms of like the evidence that we have of the Egyptian pyramids, or evidence as in they are still alive. I don't know. I don't know that we will, unless somebody has sent a Voyager and it happens to cross our paths, that we see that. Now, interstellar travel, I think, will happen first because we've already done it. Now, if you mean with people, I don't know which one would happen first, but I do think that we're so enamored of tardigrades that if you just mean with living things, the tardigrades are going to be the first ones that we send.
And I'd like to just add something. One of the papers that was put out in the 2011 symposium that DARPA had sponsored in Florida in the build-up to the RFP, it was called the weight equation. And basically what it said was that if we wait to get it right, so we just keep waiting to send a vehicle or thing out, that we will miss opportunities because you learn from doing. And so the first vehicle that's sent out should be passed by the next one that goes, because otherwise, if you don't catch up to it and pass it, you've probably waited too long. And so I think that's where the piece is. Where do we want to go? How do we want to do this? And, do we have to come back at a certain period of time? Do we have to wait to get it just right? And again, 100-Year Starship, we're not about creating a launch date or anything like that, like saying, hey, we're gonna launch this out this time. It's about making sure that the capabilities exist. And as we create those capabilities, we actually start to impact life here on Earth, because very many of the capabilities, the things we need to solve, reflect what we need to solve here on Earth. And that's what's so compelling about it to me.
Well, so we're running over time already. Lou, I know you're a long-time collaborator of Maze and have been working in this field for a long time. So if you have a very, very short question or statement.
Very short question. None of you, not even Carl, addressed what's the purpose of this mission that you've been discussing. So pretend I'm Lester Holt and give me the answer to that question.
Watch me dive in. Since I was singled out, I think there was a subtext, though, Lou, to what I was talking about, in that maybe the purpose of this mission is found here on Earth, even if the mission never goes. And the possibility that we are engaging in exercises in creativity and intellectual efforts and community building that, as Sonia mentioned, create things here on the planet. And as May mentioned, that what we need to survive in space is what we need to survive on Earth. This may be the most compelling reason to engage in this research and into these efforts. Somebody did actually mention that it's making a difference whether we actually ever go or not. And I think that's where my mind goes anyway.
This might be a nice question to end on. If everyone has just a single sentence on why you think we're good.
Well, I was teaching way back when I was a young man at the college level, and my boss took me aside and said that when you teach, you should have all your students reach way beyond their sight. They should reach as far as they can go. And if they miss that tall goal, they still learn a lot. And I think I want to thank Pete and May and everybody else. I have really enjoyed these 2 days because that's exactly what I've been doing. I've been trying to keep up with all these brilliant ideas going off in all these different directions. And by the way, I failed on most of them. But anyway, the real kicker is I believe that's the purpose. We need to all reach beyond our grasp and keep charging.
No, I agree. The purpose is to dream, to reach farther than we are right now, even if, as I said, it doesn't fly, doesn't make it. But I'm reminded of a poem that's about Icarus. Everybody knows the myth of Icarus, who flew too close to the sun and burned up. But everybody forgets that Icarus flew, and so that's why we're doing this.
That's a good question, actually. And exploration is part of human nature. It's always been done, and people keep thinking about doing it, and always came with a lot of benefits for humanity and for science. And I hope by the time people are able, or humans are able, to travel interstellar, we have a generation thinking about traveling intergalactic.
So Great question. I think everybody can have a different answer to this. My answer is more on a technological side. When you develop the ability to do so, to be able to go interstellar, along the way you develop the abilities to do many other things. And so it's not just one goal. The goal of life is not to die, even though you will. The goal of life is to live. And in this way, the goal to be able to go relativistic with something large allows you to do many, many other things, such as protect the planet, send out small missions through the solar system, et cetera. And I think that's what people often miss in this discussion. It's an enabling technology, not just a single goal technology.
Ronke?
So add to what everybody's saying, because I agree, you can just look at what we accomplished with Apollo as an example, right? 1961, let's go to the moon. 1969, we landed. And how was everything transformed? Well, they had to have communication satellites to talk to the astronauts. So now we have GPS, and they had to have, we didn't have shoe insoles before then. They developed that for the comfort of the astronauts. They developed water filtration systems that we still use. They developed sunglasses that we still use, scratch resistance lenses, over something like 6,500 inventions were directly related to the endeavor to go to the moon. And that was just an 8-year span of time. Now, if we commit to going to interstellar space, the products that come as a benefit, as a side product, are countless. And we know that this will happen because it has happened before. It's not just conjecture.
And so to end this, that is exactly it is. There was Julius Nyerere, who was the first president of Tanzania, said at one point in time, when they were trying to reach the moon, we were trying to reach the village. And it almost seems like there's a counterpoint that you can't do one or the other. But I would offer today, just as everyone has said, that we're able to reach the village today in ways, and the global village, that we would not have if we had not been trying those bigger things. And there's one other piece I would like to say. I think as we start to leave our home here on Earth, that we might get to something else, which might be that we see ourselves as Earthlings because we see ourselves and this is our home. And so maybe we can get to #Team Earthlings. Thank you.